Hey guys, it's Frito here for your Overwatch. We've played this season long enough to assess that this is the worst season we've ever had. The blog post that came out with Season 6 stated that the community was happy with the state of the game, at least the hardcore players. I wonder if they put out another dev blog if they would still agree with that assessment, because the movement towards recreating double shield but in Overwatch 2 wasn't even hard to spot. Why did they do this? I really hope that they change it. For a time in Overwatch 2, a lot of players were worried about mobility creep. We had no idea that turret creep could be around the corner. Now, luckily, they snuck in a small hotfix to Bastion so that he no longer gains armor while transforming, but if you haven't noticed, he's still a pretty strong pick. He's just not as forgiving as he was. And that's because the game is so slow and it's so deployment based that Bastion's playstyle fits in the meta anyway, and I wish that's something that they would have foreseen happening as they buffed up two supports and generally the whole game in this direction, but specifically buffing Lifeweaver and adding a strong Illari into the game, both of which just sort of set and pushed the meta to be more defensive, which made all of the reworks and strange buffs to the builder heroes as well as the turret heroes rather strange. I think what's happened in Overwatch 1 as well, and that might apply here, is that they have an idea, like, let's say we want Torb and Symmetra to be more about their weapon and less about their turret. Well, now a Torbjorn with overload can melt a Reinhardt alone. I've seen it happen with regularity. Is that how that interaction should work? Should one DPS be able to pretty easily shotgun down what's supposed to be the most durable type of character in the game? The reason why this is concerning to me is that we're creating a new logic system for what we should expect the heroes to do, and it revolves around a few principles. One, that counterpicking is the most powerful it's ever been in the history of the game. We're probably going to have to take the L on that concept because that's core to the game design as they want it currently. We're going to have to expect that you need to swap and play top meta picks and get off exploitable ones pretty quick if you don't want to lose. Now, oddly enough, I really enjoy playing this season because I'm crazy, I think. I think the meta objectively sucks, but if you're an intelligent player that knows a lot about the game, plays a lot of heroes, kind of understands the limitations of each pick or how to make different picks work, well, there's a lot of room for you to flex that kind of knowledge because the game is far more rock, paper, scissorsy. And while you can't control your teammates' picks, you can lean into whatever strategy you could go for. And it pretty much boils down like this. Is their tank exploitable? Yes or no? If yes, then exploit them. If no, what is your team doing? Try to synergize with them. This is the first time I think we've ever done this, but we're going to do a bit of a end of season tier list as we're kind of reviewing the state of the meta, and I hope things change a lot in Season 7. I'm not so sure they can though, because the way the balance strategy works is that it's discrete, as in they look at individual heroes that are either overperforming, underperforming, and tweak them quickly over time, rather than what I think the game needs is a larger downscale of power all at once. Anticipatory changes, because you can't look at the data of performance of a character like Bastion in one meta, then introduce two new elements that slows the game down and then be surprised that he's all of a sudden good. On top of, buffing him, which would have been required in the previous meta. They gotta figure this out. Like, they need to anticipate the effect the new content or major meta shifting buffs is going to have when they balance the rest of the game, which is something I've been begging them to do for years now, it seems. I'm a huge fan of today's video sponsor, HelloFresh. They're America's #1 meal kit. Gamers, you might be like me, where finding out what's for dinner is half the battle. What are you gonna make? Do you have the right ingredients? Oh, I forgot that one thing. Now you're running back to the store. HelloFresh has you covered because each week they've got 40 recipes and over 100 add-ons. Everything is pre-portioned, so it doesn't take any mental effort, which I really appreciate. And the recipes are easy to follow. Anybody can do it with clear step-by-step instructions. And most importantly of all, the food is delicious and good for you. They've got top-notch produce shipped from the farm to your door in under 7 days. You will save so much time with HelloFresh. Cut down on the planning, shopping, running around, and spend more of it on things you want to do like gaming. You gotta try HelloFresh. Use my link or go to HelloFresh.com and use code POGYOSEP50 for 50% off plus free shipping. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code with your phone. The reason why I would consider the current balance state to be the most offensive to me is that it's as if they looked at double shield from Overwatch 1 and tried their best to force that to be recreated, as if they thought to themselves, what could we do to slow down the game? Put more things in the way for the players to shoot at before they get to shoot the enemy. And just as an example, while on one hand, Lifeweaver clearly was underperforming and they needed to buff him somehow, I was begging that they would give him offense. Instead, they gave him more stats and, specifically, his tree has immunity to EMP. We've watched many metas over the years, and oftentimes a certain dominant standard gets created, whether it was dive meta, rush meta, whatever. Now we're in turret meta. There just isn't really good disable in the game to take care of it. So the only way we have to interact with the deployment kit in the game is to shoot at it with our weapons, which takes time. And when the enemy has enough of those things, we effectively are shooting through shields yet again, just like in double shield in Overwatch 1. There's no character in the game that places down a turret that disables other turrets, like an EMP turret that says, nope, in this area, no more deployables. Okay, we're just gonna shoot each other and play the shooter game again. There's no such thing. There's no EMP grenade like there is in Call of Duty, and Sombra would rather be hacking an enemy as opposed to a turret. While she can do it, it's not really that effective. You'd be better off playing a character that could just shoot the thing instead. Okay, with all that complaining out of the way, let's take a look at what I think are the top performing picks. We'll run through these quickly, have a bit of a discussion of interesting things that I've found playing the game a lot. Some of them I think are a little bit surprising, which are perhaps some of the most important observations considering the sleeper picks are the ones we got to be the most afraid of, because as Blizzard starts to buff what is otherwise a sleeper pick into a new meta, then they become oppressive, which is not a mistake I'm going to let them get away with time and time again, live service updating this game. Now, I think at the moment, the mainstream community conversation is about tanks. Playing tank feels bad and you have to be on the right pick. And it's not that I disagree with that necessarily. I just think there's also an added layer to this discussion, which modifies the tank battle entirely. And that is picking counter picks in the squishy position. Or maybe more importantly, not playing a squishy in the squishy position. On DPS, the top pick still, even after Bastion got quote-unquote nerfed, is going to be Bastion and Torb for me. These are two characters with tanky amounts of health, which is important because when you have high HP healers, you really can get the most out of their extra health pools, and they both absolutely dominate a lot of the tanks in the game. And since Blizzard kept buffing their downsides, whether it is Bastion's like recovery time on his reload, the time it takes for his nade to explode, Torb shoots faster, like way too fast, in my opinion, and they play the type of playstyle that synergizes around Illari or against her. Because if you think if Illari is setting the meta, she does two things, at least most of the time. Pumps big healing values into something in front of her off a corner, low mobility, low range, so you gotta play close to her, and she snipes the enemy. What this creates is a very prolonged poke phase, similar to the attrition that we experienced in Double Shield. So you sort of have to hold your position and shoot back for a long time. So having a large volume of damage, a lot of ammo, and a little bit extra health both synergizes and counters that playstyle. Remember, of course, other ranged characters had their range damage reined in or their health points lowered, for example, Widowmaker. Meanwhile, Torb can pop an overload, avoid getting one-hit killed by Widow, double tap her across the map, and it's very low cost, low risk. Bastion is similar, and the biggest Bastion tip I have is use recon mode a lot longer than you think you should. It's totally competent and can headshot. Focus on that and the nade for most of your neutral fight value and transform when the fight is fully committed. This character would be so much scarier if I saw players really master what he can do. A lot of Bastion players make the mistake of transforming when the enemy is at too far of range so they can get it around cover, or it's just not necessarily that effective at longer ranges anyway. So wait for the fight to be fully committed, then unleash your unlimited ammo. Okay, those picks are going to do the best against most things. It's actually kind of nice that they're not as popular as they should be based on their power. They're just way too hilariously good, and importantly, contribute a hilarious amount to the tank battle. If the enemy goes like Ashe, Sojourn, or Soldier, Cassidy, double hit scan of any other description, and you have a Bastion instead, it can tend to feel like an auto win, because the moderate sustained damage you can expect from poke, otherwise just doesn't sneak up on you, and the turret healing outmatches it. You need a character that has overkill damage, essentially. It's got to be able to outmatch that healing. So, some examples of that: Hanzo one-shots, Echo Beam, Symmetra can get healed and move up to tier 3 charge, and Soldier, lots of ammo in his clip, not quite a Bastion, but more easily repositions, looks up, got a good ultimate as well. But another error, I think, in balancing, they buffed his healing station, which not only helps him sustain, kind of stacks up on all these characters that are kind of tanky and want to be able to hold their position, so he helps with that in a big way. In the B tier, I'm going to say that there's a bunch of characters that have some strong maps or matchups, but I just think they can be countered. And most of the time, they have a more reliable counterpart above them. And it gets even worse into the C tier, where these picks just a bit slow or unforgiving. There was times where Widowmaker was dominating the server everywhere, but between her and Ash's hitbox, standing up all cute, perched up with a head bigger than the Statue of Liberty, you can land your plays with these picks, but will you land enough to outweigh how much free damage the Bastion's putting out? Kind of tough to justify. Now let's move on to talking about the tanks. The talk of the town this season has been Orisa and Zarya. They're going to be the most reliable tanks to not die to the things that easily kill tanks. But the state of tank is so weak right now, realistically, I shouldn't even have an S tier. Something's got to be. But like, do I think even the best tanks are A tier or maybe even B tier and how much value they can get? Like, the game's not really in their hands, a big percentage of it. You should focus on holding your position and exploiting enemies' mistakes, but making plays is pretty difficult considering how forgiving the backline is. If you try to go at it, it's going to out-heal your damage most of the time, so you're better off just kind of farming for ults or playing off your support ults. Do not underrate how insane Sigma is right now. Yes, the Brawler tanks can run past him or run him over, but we're in a poke meta. He's got high damage, which you need nowadays, and giving your ranged poke a shield can be pretty nuts. Everybody gets worried about D.Va getting countered by Zarya, but Zarya's close range, relatively speaking. You shouldn't be picking D.Va on those maps anyway, more so to control high ground or to counteract things like Bastion or Illari ult. The tank line's not really moving anyway, so if you play defensive as D.Va and interact with the enemy trying to land damage on you, D.Va's got a lot of plays to make, as long as you are able to get value and run from the Zarya before she starts capturing the objective. Junker Queen is going to fit into another archetype that's still pretty good, fitting into that overkill aggression playstyle. But surprisingly enough, the Shout is pretty effective when used defensively too. With the game getting a bit attritional, having that bit of extra life and move speed, one of the better defenses in the game for your team, actually. Because think about it, like, if Bastion's getting played a lot, do you want to shield the Bastion's damage or just move out the way? Because the shield's only going to last a second. There's no point to put a shield in front of the Bastion necessarily. It doesn't do a whole lot. You probably just die anyway. Whereas having a bit of burst of health onto your character and moving out the way, well, that's pretty useful. The only reason she's lower on the list, just a harder degree of execution. But don't sleep on the next pick, which is similar as well when it comes to all offense, no defense. That's Doomfist. He fits that archetype really well. And funnily enough, Illari doesn't really do anything against Doom. And it is another case where I'd put Doom in S tier if you are a Doom specialist. Because players, very clearly in my experience the last few weeks, have no idea how to counter Doom and just expect someone else on the team to take care of it. They'll charge the Doom, of course. Now, Doom being a pub stumper pick was kind of always the case in Overwatch 2, but it was usually the case that other characters were just so reliably going to like walk on the enemy that you picking Doom was a lot of razzle dazzle for less payoff than you might just get like diving with Winston or something. But because there's things that shred those tanks, he'll get in and out, get his picks, and importantly, gets back to his heals for a big burst of life. So oddly enough, plays quite well in this meta. The shield tanks don't look so bad if there isn't a Bastion on the field, but it gets a little bit awkward playing around Illari, playing tanks that like to go in. So I suggest you pull out Ryan, Ram, or Winston when your team isn't playing her. I think Wrecking Ball's incredibly easy to counter. Things that are already good in the game right now counter him, so that puts him in a tough spot. And Roadhog, same story, but either one can catch the enemy out if they don't know how to counter it. Just the off-meta surprise can sometimes be enough. But I think Doom is probably the king of that version of gameplay. Last up, talk about the supports. We mentioned her multiple times. Illari is going to be up here at S tier, but I'll also put an asterisk by her to say that she probably has the most variance of any support. She can whiff her shots. She can fail to APM check. to get the most out of her healing and damage. Tunnel visioning on Illari seems to happen a lot, and her ult does have some hard counters that will eat it up. So it seems pretty common that she's pretty boom or bust. If she whiffs her shots or ultimate, she can kind of just disappear from the game. But land those and you're in business. And I'm going to say a lot of attention has been on the healing pylon for good reason. I don't know why it has shield health, for example. I think that's unnecessary. But low-key, one of the best things that I think is holding Illari's gameplay to be so stable is how flexible Outburst is. While a lot of the supports have movement escapes now, that's not so uncommon. But having one that also boops the enemy back means that you can fully cancel out an enemy tank's engage button, which makes them even worse in this meta. Because think about it, supports having a knockback is usually separate or specialized. Lucio and Brig have one. Zen's got a kick now. The personality of those, I think, is a bit restrained. But Outburst gets you to high ground, creates distance from the enemy off you and your team, and then on top of it, she's also a character that can use that position very well. Like, it's a different thing for Lucio to constantly be in the skybox. Like, his weapon isn't so severe. Brig, whip-shotting your tank away to heal everyone is like core to her playstyle, and she doesn't add poke, right? Having a poke character that boops things away like a Brig or Lucio can, then also headshotting you, I think low-key is one of those uncovered gems of an ability that people are overlooking about Illari. If she just didn't have the knockback, then you could engage on her more freely, and then she could have an exploit or a weakness. But because she can both entrench a position, then vacate it and create distance, well, it's no wonder that we're kind of stuck in the meta rule set that I'm discussing. But it's not just Illari's fault, it's also the rest of the balance patch as it's been pushed the last couple seasons. Okay, talked a lot about Illari, of course, but she is that important. I don't think she's a must pick though, and in fact, I'd say if you can't aim, avoid her. Don't pick her. Instead, I'd say BAP, Lifeweaver, and Brig right now are way easier to play. Lifeweaver especially really only requires positional knowledge and some timing, and you're going to offer the team a whole lot of sustain and carry the game by extending fights much longer than they should. Important for me to note that these top picks, other than Ana, are very self-sustainable. I suggest going to Ana if you have to disable their tank, have a stellar nano boost target on your team, or think you'll be able to position reliably enough to get nades over and over again. You haven't seen Kiriko on the list so far, so that must mean I don't rate her so highly, and that is the case. She's down here in B tier, and that's important because if she's not so popular, then Ana nades can be devastating. I think my B tier might get some groans from the audience, expecting Kiriko to always be top of the meta, but I think that you must land consistent headshots and get picks for Curie to be any good whatsoever, even with her pretty insane buff this season. Because the other healing in the game is so severe, and Illari can provide offense as well, she has a very similar 50-50 on healing and dealing damage, you absolutely must play the DPS flanking playstyle for Curie to make any sense, in my opinion, and expect to get your value from headshots. You simply won't match up to the heal stats these other supports are giving, and by some miracle, Kitsune Rush does not look like the strongest support ult anymore after numerous nerfs, and Illari drops the sun on you, which is so much more devastating, which yes, Curie can cleanse that, but overall those plays are a bit marginal, which means you're always operating at a deficit, similar to the skill shot heroes in the DPS camp. Very similar logic in my opinion. Timing a Suzu perfectly, like how many times you're going to do it in order to outweigh that your ult is weaker than hers. Otherwise in the B tier, I'm going to say Mercy because the game is very much either poke pickoffs, and you don't really need the blue beam to get it done anymore. Keep in mind there's a bunch of skill shots and hit scans that I don't rate very highly, so maybe if you pair those two together, you can turn one of those other DPS into the firepower that you'd expect from Bastion, but that's a pretty fragile setup considering that you could have Bastion and Illari and both of them be a significant threat, whereas Mercy on one of the hit scans is going to put all your eggs in that basket. Doable perhaps, but she maintains in the B tier because I think her ult game is simply not strong enough for the absolutely nutty ults that are getting played right now. Yeah, you can Valkyrie heal your whole team, or you could place a Lifeweaver tree in the middle of them and they all gain overhealth, like we're playing goats again. I think Lucio's underrated. When ults are a major way that anything's going to die, speeding and sound barrier is one of the better ways to defend your team from ults wiping you. So look to him to be one of the better options if you think your ult defense is required. Brig has a bit of that too, but it's a little less guaranteed. The problem, of course, with Lucio is that his firepower and healing are really weak. I'm going to say Zen is utterly outclassed by Illari, and Moira is really paling in comparison when there's so much big healing in the game. Throw a damage orb and it's like accidentally going to get healed away with Illari's pylon. Meanwhile, she's shooting headshots back at your team. What are you doing? It's like, it's just not good enough. The mobility doesn't really matter. Moira needs to have some squishy on the enemy team to bully for her to make sense. Similar to Zen, who also needs a pretty ideal setup. Guys, that's everything for the tier list video. I hope you did enjoy it. If you did, please be sure to leave the video with a like, and don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos come out. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.